Welcome to the New Chemist podcast. We're glad you're listening. Feel free to download this podcast on Spotify and Google Podcasts. Here on the New Chemist, we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as the other sciences, careers, community, research, and COVID-19. We're happy you're tuning in. My guest today is Dr. Delmar Larsen. Thanks for joining me today. It is good to hear from you. Just briefly, I'll inform my audience about you. Dr. Delmar Larsen is a professor in the Department of Chemistry at the University of California, Davis. Dr. Larsen received his PhD from the University of Chicago in chemistry and did postdoctoral stints at the Free University in Amsterdam, studying biophysics, and the University of Southern California, studying chemistry. In 2005, Dr. Larsen moved to the University of California, Davis as an assistant professor. He was promoted to associate professor in 2012 and was promoted to full professor in 2019. Dr. Larsen's current research interests extend across many scientific disciplines, including biophysics, physical chemistry, molecular biology, and computational modeling, with a common thread of investigating and characterizing rapid condensed phase dynamics. Dr. Larsen is the founder and director of the LibreText project, consisting of 12 independently operating and interconnected libraries that focus on augmenting post-secondary education in specific fields in both the STEM fields, the social sciences, and the humanities. Please welcome Dr. Larsen. Okay, Dr. Larsen, thanks again for joining me. What have been your long-standing interests in the field of science?
Well, I've always enjoyed pursuing truth, or at least what I thought was truth. It wasn't until later on in my education that I understand that science is not entirely that, if you understand science properly. But it's that desire of trying to identify truth that has guided me in terms of what I do, and what I've been doing for the last multiple decades.
Wow, that's good. That's good. So can you give me one specific example of where this occurred, where you were seeking for truth or going after truth, or the desire was evident in some of your experiences, whether it be in research or in the work you've done with LibreText, in which from my understanding, I would say that has created opportunities for a lot of people to gain access to more information and to further their skills and develop their acumen in terms of the chemical sciences and other areas as well. So,
well, I mean, definitely. So, as a research level professor, I have obligations in terms of maintaining a research laboratory. In my field of science is ultrafast laser spectroscopy of primarily photoreceptor-based systems,
okay,
and other photoactive systems. And then in the last 13, 14 years, we've been pursuing the LibreText project. In its earlier incarnation, it was called the ChemWiki, which is meant more of a dissemination of content in order to facilitate the education of students, both in America and abroad, because that's a guiding principle of that. I would say the desire for pursuing truth is more in the former category rather than the LibreText project, which is a very different perspective on doing things. And, you know, I should be clear about that. You know, basically every manuscript that, you know, of the 100 or so manuscripts that I've published pursues some level of what we consider to be truth. That being said, I should be specific, and this is a common issue that lay people have in terms of science, that while science pursues truth, and to use truth in quotations, is actually is more pursuing models in order to interpret reality under the hopes that we identify truth. But you can argue from a philosophical argument, we will never get there. And that's particularly important, especially in current discourse of science, especially in America, about recognizing the limitations of science. And if you believe that science resolves truth, then when science naturally evolves, truth shouldn't naturally evolve, or at least truth of the underlying material. And so there's a disconnect that's involved in that. But nonetheless, truth and knowledge has always been something that's guided me far more than other issues like grades, for example, much to the displeasure of some of my high school instructors.
Okay.
So I can
Okay.
certainly discuss any manuscript that you may want in more detail, if I could remember the manuscripts that you may be interested in. But it's a general aspect, and it underlies all research active faculty. They're constantly pursuing these scientific endeavors.
Okay. Okay. That's good. That's good. So another question I have: how do you maintain view of the bigger picture in your career and in your life in general? How do you maintain view of your end goals, even in research, even when you encounter whether it be a challenge or something of that sort or an obstacle? How do you maintain view of the bigger picture?
Well, I would say the answer is poorly. These days, everything is in sheer chaos, and I'm not entirely sure where things are going to lie in the upcoming months or even years.
Yeah.
And it's obviously important in order to have a good balance between work and home life and such. Unfortunately, many of my colleagues, and myself included, don't have a great balance of that. So our work is constantly extended into our private life. And I would say I definitely am in that category. And there are certainly a lot of, so I'm not in a great position in order to provide recommendations for people who are trying to see the balance between those two. In terms of the bigger picture of career, the key point is to recognize that multiple career paths are available and that you can switch from one to the other as needed. For example, when I started as a professor 15 years ago, it was research as the primary obligation and priority in my work life. In the last 10 years of that, it's been slowly transitioning into the LibreText project, as you mentioned before, because that I could see has a very meaningful impact. And while research is very fulfilling in many ways and many aspects, it can have a paradigm shift of all of culture and all of reality, or at least the way we view reality. But the vast majority of research is incremental or doesn't fall in line in that category. So it's hard to see the impact of what you're doing. It's nice to see, what your H index is and how many citations and things like that. But when it's all said and done, it's the LibreText project that really helps to put me into a context of seeing the impact of what I'm trying to do, and then that really drives me in order to pursue it.
Okay, that's good. That's very good. So as we continue, another question that comes to mind is, how have you been adaptive and creative in the field of science?
Well, I mean, it's really easy in order to go to this quote that Einstein gave many years ago, in terms of basically arguing that imagination is one of the most important aspects associated with doing good science, and that's very true. So it's the scientists that are very rigid in the way that they view things oftentimes have a very short half-life, and are unable to deal with the fact that things change and you be able to deal with it. So one of the nice things about being in a large university provides us faculty that has the opportunity to be exposed to a wide range of different activities, research in a variety of different fields, and various ways of implementing things. And that right there is probably one of the most important aspects associated with maintaining my ability in order to be adaptive and creative in what's going on there. If I were in a much smaller institution with far fewer faculty coming in, visitors, speakers, and such like that, I think it'd be a harder opportunity or a harder chance for me to be able to maintain that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. That's very true. It's very true. So, another question I have for you: how have you sought or found the right environment for you to thrive scientifically and intellectually? How did you find it? Because I think any observer could say that you are thriving scientifically and intellectually. So how would you describe the process or the journey for you finding this place or right environment?
Well, as a chemist, you typically make a decision sometime in graduate school and perhaps earlier about whether you want to pursue academia or if you want to go into industry. And they have their different cultures and benefits and detractions associated with that. So that's the first point that needs to be done in order to decide where to go. Naturally, in both of those directions requires finding a place to sit. And when it comes to academia, it actually turns out that there are, if you want to do research level at the R1 institution, there are a handful, multiple handfuls of departments that you can go to, and you go on the market and such, and you typically, if you're lucky, get a handful of offers that you're able to work from, and then you're largely stationary for a period of time, so you don't have a lot of flexibility. Knock on wood. Many people do move around, but most faculty don't move around from one campus to another campus, and then that's largely where you're stuck. And I use the term stuck quite loosely here. It's not meant to be a negative necessarily, but the mobility is far less than what you can expect in industry, where you can go from one spot to another spot. Part of the reason for that is in academia, you have the opportunity of getting tenure, which provides a strong stability and protection for your job, which is exceedingly important right now in this COVID era. So that is tied into the position. So once you have that, you're less likely in order to move. Although when you do move, you oftentimes can negotiate to have tenure come with you. So that's not meant to say that you're up in the, it's random in terms of where you find the right environment. Once you come to the campus that you're at, then it's up to you to find your colleagues that you're able to communicate with and the community within the campus in order for you to be able to fit into and pursue that. And again, by being in a larger institution, I've been fortunate in order to be able to find many groups and many faculty that I've had great scientific relationships with and collaborations in order to move forward. So it's important to always look for these people in order to move forward.
Okay, yes, that's true. That's very true. As well as, how have you maintained vision and teamwork in your environment?
Well, I mean, one of the important things to keep in mind with that question is that when you're running a research program, you're running a research group, which means that you have graduate students, oftentimes undergraduate students, maybe postdoctoral research assistants and such like that. So you're intrinsically running a collaborative group. And the more important aspect is how to run that group effectively. And unfortunately, many of us learn that by trial and error, less than being trained in terms of how to be an effective manager in order to run these students and move it forward. So that collaborative aspect is baked into how research is typically done in academia. It's also baked into how research is done in industry, although I know less about that, in part because there's a lot of return on investment evaluations and oversight and feedback in order to make sure that revenue and costs are all used effectively off of that. But I can't really comment confidently on that culture.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. It's also, my question for you is, why did you choose chemistry as a field to major in? Why did you choose chemistry? You know,
It's always been chemistry for me. It's never
okay,
been a so let me rephrase that. The biggest choice I had in college was what type of chemistry I was interested in.
okay,
And physical chemistry came out quite naturally because of my interest in math and physics and such like that. But I always had a desire for biological chemistry. In fact, for the first quarter uh, at the University of Washington, I was a biochemistry major, and then I switched over to physical chemistry. But I overlap with biology, physics, and chemistry in my research.
okay. So it sounds like you have done work in biophysical chemistry.
Yes.
Okay. My question to you also is, what specific area of physical chemistry really was your main interest? Was it thermodynamics, or quantum mechanics, or was it a mixture of both?
No, I love thermodynamics, but uh, I'm a kineticist or a dynamicist at heart.
Okay.
um, Quantum mechanics is beautiful. Statistical mechanics is beautiful. It's all beautiful when you get into the details behind it. Uh, so you know, I was trained in graduate school as a dynamicist, and specifically an ultra-fast laser dynamicist. So I was interested in things that are happening on a femtosecond, picosecond, and nanosecond time scale. Before that, when I was an undergraduate, I was trained in a gas phase molecular beam helium cluster experiment with some mass spectrometry and a few other things associated with that. So I went from gas phase to condensed phase and transitioned from dynamics that are more energy resolved to dynamics that are temporally resolved.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Um, so you said it was always chemistry for you. So even in your doctoral studies, you didn't feel like changing your mind, or you didn't consider changing course?
Well, if you talk to anyone who's gone through graduate school, typically, at least in America, which is on the average of about 5 years in order to get your PhD, you get the blues right around the third year.
Okay.
And that's when that's when you start looking at, do you really want to do this sort of thing? Now the magnitude of the blues depends upon the healthiness of the relationship with your advisor and your colleagues in the group, and that is invariably related to the campus that you're in. So some campuses are less healthy than other campuses.
Okay.
But certainly I went through the blues in order to look at alternative options out there. But I stuck with it and moved forward, and quite happy that I did.
Yeah, and you could see the fruits of your labor, the success, as we see right now. My last two questions for you. Do you have any advice to those wanting to pursue the field you are currently working in?
Are you referring to ultrafast laser spectroscopy, to chemistry, academia specifically, or
Academia specifically.
to
Specifically towards undergraduates and incoming graduate students and current graduate students, so students in general?
I've seen a lot of students come in that may doubt themselves, doubt their ability in order to move forward. And I've seen some graduate students that overly inflate their expectations of how successful they're going to be based off of their intelligence. how well they do in classes. And I think the single most important trait in order to be successful in graduate school is not the education. I'm going to phrase it. It's not the intelligence, although that is always good. It's always the dedication. How much effort you're willing to dedicate to your program and making it successful. As long as your education, your intelligence meets a certain level, then it's just basically how much skin are you willing to put into the game in order to move it forward. And that I would say is the single most important component associated with the success of a graduate student, and something I encourage graduate students to develop early, which is a good work ethic, because that makes your advisor happy. To see your progress. When your advisor happy, the letters of recommendation get stronger, and everything is a positive feedback in order to move forward. And then you can flip it around by saying a poor work ethic typically doesn't get you very far at all, for the same reason. So I've seen very intelligent people in institutions I've been in before, the University of Chicago and Berkeley, and other places that have collapsed and failed because they just didn't have the work ethic in order to be able to put the time in necessary to be successful in graduate school. So it's the number one thing that I would feel is important for students to cultivate.
Yeah, I agree. Work ethic is very important. So my last question for you: what has been some of the most beneficial advice you have received to date?
It's really quite broad. So if I were to target that towards students looking at graduate school programs, the most productive advice that I could give and that I have gotten was that when you're looking at graduate programs and you have been accepted at several graduate programs, to go to the program that has the most number of faculty that you would like to work with. So if you have a campus that has a specific person that you definitively want to work with and no one else that you really want to work with, the odds of you getting into a specific program is not always 100%. Only if there's a specific specific faculty member. So having the secondary options available are exceedingly important in order to be able to move forward. So all graduate program of all advice for at that stage, that's the one I think that's most important in selecting graduate programs out there. Everything else is a function of the work ethic that I talked about before. You just continue on. You want to continue that and move that forward through every stage of what you're doing. At some point, so when you become a faculty member, you have flexibility to be able to guide your research in the ways that you want. And that's one of the aspects where the creativity that you brought up a while ago is exceedingly important in order to find out where you want your research to go. But that also gives you a bigger picture about, well, what do you want to do in your research, in your activities? And you have as a faculty, especially as a tenured faculty member in most American institutions, and I think most institutions abroad, you have a lot of freedom to decide about what you want to do. So for example, you mentioned the LibreText project. That right there doesn't fold directly into this research active project that is encouraged for faculty in my position. Nonetheless, I had the utility, the freedom in order to be able to pursue it, and I pursued it quite aggressively, where it's taken even some of the work ethic that I was talking about away from my research, but that's because I value it at the same level as I value my research. So it's important to be flexible and be dynamic and pursue what you want to pursue when you have the opportunities in order to do so.
Okay, that's good. That's very good. Thank you so much, Dr. Larsen, for joining me today. It is much appreciated.
No worries. Sounds great.
Thanks for listening. We're glad you were able to tune into this podcast. Once again, this is The New Chemist, where we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as the other sciences, careers, community, research, and COVID-19. Thanks again for listening. Note, the views on this podcast represent those of my guests and I.